Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's stream. This is not a live stream. I have recorded it in the noontime outside. I thought there's going to be some sunshine, and I wanted to enjoy the weather. As you may have already noticed in the past few live streamings that I'm having some neck issues and shoulder issues due to long hours of working, and that's unfortunately unavoidable. If I'm going to make streams for you, I have to sit in front of the laptop, read, research, prepare, and then do the stream itself from my office or home office, let's say. But today I thought I would make this stream to you from outdoors, and I would also, first of all, enjoy the weather, and secondly, I would still present to you the content that you are craving every day. So if you're liking this channel, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe and hit the like button before we start. What we're going to speak today is very important in my opinion, because in the past 7 to 8 years when I started this YouTube channel, I always tried to explain why the imperialist powers, the US, Israel, the UK, Germany, and many other in the region have conspired to start a regime change war against Damascus, and they have successfully created an armed insurgency which consisted of tens of thousands of militants and tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons, training, ammunition, and logistics, including the so-called non-lethal aid. So they have managed to overthrow the government, but in the past years I always focused on the geopolitical implications of this regime change war, and why these imperialists wanted to oust Assad not for the good reasons but for the bad reasons. Now in this video in this stream I would like to mention the mistakes done by the former Assad government in order to avoid similar mistakes in the future, because I don't think that any rule can last forever, and there is going to be a day and time when we speak about removing the regime in Damascus, the current one, or going against it or trying to replace it. So in order to avoid similar mistakes, we have to discuss about the mistakes of the former government in order to build a better Syria for the future generations. And just for you to know, this is not going to be anytime soon. I'm not optimistic per se, and I think that this is going to last at least 1 decade. And if I'm being very optimistic, I would say 10 years or 1 decade. But if I'm going to be more realistic, this could last 20 to 30 years. And if God gives me enough time and life, then I would probably see that day again, that Syria is liberated, truly liberated from the mercenaries who are occupying nowadays Syria. And I don't use this word easily, but as you may know, HTS militants are paid $1,000 per month, and who is paying them? They don't have an industry, they don't have factories, they don't have an economy by themselves, so they are funded by outside forces, so they are mercenaries. In any ways, in 1963, when the Ba'athists came to power, and later in 1970, the father of Bashar, he managed to orchestrate and execute a coup alongside his military officers and friends in Syria. This has been an era that in the region, coups was something normalized, right? I'm not saying it is normal, but it was normalized. And this has been happening in many places in West Asia or in the Middle East, including in Egypt, right? The Jamal Abdel Nasser system came after, again, what they called the free officers coup against the former regime. So a similar thing happened in Syria. But when Hafez al-Assad came to power, his friends in the military, and regardless of their religious and sectarian background, he had made sure that the process of building a regime is contributed by different factions in the Syrian society, including the majority of his friends who participated in the coup were the Sunnis. So in this case, for example, the defense minister of Syria, Mustafa Atlas, which we're going to come for this later, and we're going to speak about this in the context of the regime change and then a possible scenario for Syria, including the son of this former defense minister who was a close friend of Hafez al-Assad. So in this case, Hafez al-Assad made sure to be very inclusive of every component of the Syrian society. He was not sectarian. He was rather a pan-Arabist, and he made sure that if we're going to call it a regime, this regime was established on solid ground. And one of the aspects of this regime was the military. So he made sure that the military's loyalty was for him and for the state. So the orders of the military doesn't only come from the defense ministry or the chief of staff, but rather from the president himself. So he was basically the leader of the military as well. Now, in this case, he put lots of trust in his friends, in his colleagues who participated with him in this. But in the process of building a regime, he needs a popular ground for the regime, right? So he made sure to implement socialist aspects in the economy, and he uplifted the below middle class and the middle class people, and especially in the rural areas. This is something important that we have to mention if we want to compare between Bashar and Hafez later in this video, that Hafez made sure that he would develop and improve the situation in the rural areas. And this has been seen clearly during his time in power, that most of the rural areas before him were completely dead. And once he came to power, he made sure to develop the rural areas. And the rural areas have witnessed electricity, schools, universities, medical system, healthcare, and their grains and their vegetables, and the farmers were always enjoyed support from the government, into extent that the government gave lots of land to the farmers, and then said, I guarantee that whatever you are harnessing, I'm going to come and take it all. So the government took all the vegetables, all the whatever is being harnessed by the farmers. They took them all, bought them from them, and then distributed it into the markets. So in this case, the farmers had like a guaranteed income from the government, and they have improved their financial and economic status, into extent that most of the jewelry shops that I remember, for example, in Aleppo, they used to sell gold to the farmers, and the farmers used to they don't want to store money, but rather they stored gold in this case. So why I'm giving you this context, because when between 1979 and 1982, when first attempt for regime change started against the Assad rule by the Muslim Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood didn't find support in the rural areas. They couldn't mobilize the people in the rural areas. In the contrary, the rural areas were very loyal to the government, and the rural areas were the majority of the people, or the people who were, let's say, they're not ready to wage any type of militant activity against the government. In this case, the focus was mostly inside the cities. So you have seen the city of Hama and the city of Aleppo went relatively out of the control of the government by the Muslim Brotherhood, because they couldn't encourage and motivate the rural areas to go against the government. But this has helped him a lot, and this has facilitated his, let's say, crushing the Muslim Brotherhood insurgency against his rule, and he was successful in this. But later, under Bashar al-Assad, we're going to speak about this, that he neglected mostly the rural areas, not completely, mostly, and he focused on the cities, and then the insurgency started against him from the rural areas against the cities. So this is the difference, one of the differences between Bashar and Hafez in this case. But Hafez also made sure that his regime is built on enough moderate elements in it that they're fine with like cooperating with Saudi Arabia, for example, and other regional powers. In this case, like Hafez al-Assad knew for sure that there are people in his regime who have ties to Saudi Arabia, for example, and he knew that there are figures in his regime who had ties with even the United States. And by saying ties, like he used to use these elements in his regime to keep this communication with countries that are challenged to his system in Syria. So there were people like Abdul Halim Khaddam, and there was another figure from the house of Shihabi. And those people were definitely, they had ties to outside intelligence under the supervision of Hafez al-Assad. He knew that they have ties, and he used them to communicate with the outside forces in this case. Now, under Bashar, when he came to power, he cut the wings of these middlemen in the regime, let's say. Bashar was more strict than his father when it came to the construct of the regime itself. Now, Hafez al-Assad, so he was more, let's say, I don't know if you want to use the term diplomatic, but he was more flexible, let's say, in this case, into the extent that when Hafez al-Assad saw that the Soviet Union has collapsed, and the Syrian military and the Syrian system was mostly built on Soviet support, when he saw that the Soviet Union is collapsing, and he wasn't stubborn in this case, and he opened channels with the United States. Like during the Second Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein invaded Iraq, during this time, Syria also witnessed the fall of the Soviet Union, and there was no longer a superpower in the back of Syria. So Syria did the flexible thing under Hafez by opening channels with the United States, by saying that I would contribute in the war against Saddam Hussein to liberate Kuwait. So Syria sent a letter to basically Saddam, telling him that he has to withdraw from Kuwait or they are compelled to participate in the military operation. And Saddam refused to withdraw from Kuwait. And then the Syrians said, we are for the our Arabic duty compels us, or all these cliches, that we have to participate in liberating our brothers and sisters in Kuwait. So they sent thousands of soldiers into the Iraqi border in this case. So what I'm trying to say is, Hafez al-Assad, he detected the shift in the balance of power on the international scene. So he swung between left and right and center depending on the wind. Internally was the same. He always kept this different, let's say, he allowed different circles of power to be established inside the regime itself, and he knowingly allowed them to operate inside the regime because he didn't want to antagonize these different circles of power, which they had also outside ties. But he was also the man in charge, and he kept the balance in the regime itself internally, and on the external level as well. This doesn't mean at all that Hafez was flexible all the time. Like, for example, when the civil war happened in Lebanon, and Syrian army went to Lebanon to try to stop the civil war after the permission of the Arab League. Then when Syria felt empowered and emboldened, they have confronted the US presence in Lebanon, they have confronted the Israeli presence in Lebanon, and then in the 90s secretly also supported Hezbollah, but not as blatantly as Bashar did, for example. So I would say Hafez was more like a strategist, and he played the long game, and he had his own calculations, and he understood that Syria, as a relatively smaller power in the region, it can't become, let's say, a country that is completely aligned with Iran, for example, or completely aligned with Russia, but rather he keeps his very good relationship and strategic relationships with them, and then still keeps a minimum level of communication with the foes or the rivals, and in this case is the US or Saudi Arabia or others in the region. But with Saudi Arabia, this is also important. We have to mention, like the Saudis blame Bashar for something after he took power, because under Hafez, there were very good relationship between Syria and Egypt. And during this time, there was something called scene, something like this. It was like Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. This equation, like when there is any files that the Arabic countries want to discuss in the region and solve it, it was always Hafez al-Assad, Hosni Mubarak, and I think he was King Abdullah, anyways, the king of Saudi Arabia. They used to meet and discuss, and then they don't disagree on the outcomes. They were always finding a solution that these three countries accept, because Syria, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia were considered the leading powers in the Arabic world. So this has given Syria lots of legitimacy in the region, and also emboldened its position also in the region. Now, under Bashar, what happened is, in this case, why Saudis blame him, because the Saudis say, like, in the past, under your father's rule, there was no issue that was difficult for us to solve, and everything was possible to be solved through communication between us, me in Saudi Arabia, you in Syria and Egypt. But you, Bashar, you brought the Turks and the Qataris and opened them the gates in Syria, and this is true, because were it not for Bashar, Qatar and Turkey would not have had any influence over Syria. He allowed them to invest in Syria. He opened the gates for them to come to Syria in order to counterbalance the Saudi influence in the region, and this has proven to be a fatal mistake later. So those were the things that happened under Hafez. Of course, Hafez rule was still politically authoritarian. Like this is something that I discuss with lots of Syrians nowadays, because in the press they always say that the Assad regime, the son and the father, were always sectarian, right? Like their persecution was based on sectarian violence. No, that's not true. Under both Assads, the Syrian rule was based on political authoritarianism, on a rule that doesn't allow meaningful opposition, political opposition, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Sunni, whether you're an Alawite, whether you're a Druze, whether you are a Kurd, it's irrelevant. If you're a Sunni and you were loyal to the regime, they would take you up. And if you're an Alawite and you went against the regime, then you will go down. So this was the case under both Assads. It wasn't based on religion or sectarian or ethnicity, etc. I think in this case this has to be really made clear to the people, because the mainstream press keeps telling, like, the majority of the Sunnis rose against Assad because they were fed up by his minority rule. That's not the case. I mean, most of the ministers were Sunni. His wife was Sunni. The defense minister, the vice president, so many other positions were Sunni, including, I think, Ali Mamluk was also Sunni, the head of the Syrian National Intelligence, before he was replaced in the past 2 years. So in this case, the sect religion played no role, in my opinion. But the bigger mistake in this case was Hafez was preparing his older son Basil to succeed him, and he was preparing him, and he was basically in the military. So he was being groomed in the regime, among the military officers, intelligence, politics, in order for him to understand the internal power struggle and outside power struggle. And this is important for someone to become a president of a country like Syria. So unfortunately, though, for him, for Hafez, his son passed away early, 1994, when he had a car accident on his way to the airport, and he died. And he had to call his son, Bashar, to come from London, where he was studying medicine, ophthalmologist, basically, or practicing it in the hospital there, to come back to Syria and, you know, be involved in politics. But 6 years of time or 5 years of time was not enough for Bashar to be groomed enough in the regime, and especially that he was very, very young. So we're speaking about when Bashar came to power, he was 34 years old. So 6 years earlier, he was 28 years old or so. I'm not good in math, but I think it's 28. So somebody came 28 years old. I mean, he's a boy, and there were so many officers with higher positions in the intelligence, in the security, in politics, that they couldn't take him seriously, let's say, right? Because they have more experience than him, so they weren't really happy with the um, this inheritance of power. So this was, I think, a mistake by Hafez al-Assad to inherit power to his son. After Basel was probably more acceptable because he was in the military for a long, long time. Since he finished education, he was already in the military. He was older than his brother. He was groomed in the military, unlike his brother, which came from a medical background with no involvement in politics, no involvement in the military. And despite that, Hafez decided that he wants to give it to Bashar. I think in this case, it would have been better if um, there are multiple personalities in the former system. For example, Farouk Shara was the foreign minister under Hafez, and he negotiated with the Americans, he negotiated with the Israelis. He had a long diplomatic experience in managing the affairs of Syria. I think he was a very good candidate to lead Syria after him for probably another 7 years, and then elections, etc. But giving power to Bashar and changing the constitution for him to come to power at 34 years old, I think he lacked lots of experience to lead the country like Syria. And he came from London. He was liberalized there, and he came and he was probably impressed by how the West operates on a social level and how open they are. So he came in with a very confrontational mentality with the society itself. And it's not like he confronted them brutally, but he wanted to change the value system of the people in Syria and try to westernize the people. And he wanted to bring more progressivism to the Syrian society, which the majority in Syria still believe believe that religion is the source of not only of our spirituality and our belief and communication with God and praying, etc., but rather it's a way of life, especially the Muslims. For Muslims, the religion is not only a religion of spirituality, but religion of your daily practices in life, how you communicate with people, how you communicate with women, how you communicate with animals, what to eat and what to not to eat. There's so many things in Islam that people they shape their lives based on what Islam has ordered them to do. So for him to come and try to open the society in a very fast pace has created a backlash in the society, and he tried to bring this like civil society, let's say create a civil society, women rights, etc. I'm not saying those are wrong, but I'm just saying that the civil society was not ready to accept a fast process, a fast pace of change in the society itself. So in this case, I think he wanted to open up not only the society but also the economy, and this was the major probably mistake. It's a fatal mistake more than any geopolitical decision that he has taken. And you would be wondering why. Because when he came and he inherited a government, the government economic policy was mostly socialist. They have supported the middle class and the below middle class. They were a government support for different sectors like medical sector, healthcare was free, education was free. And it's not like he completely eliminated it, but he presented a different economic model, and this was called an um, um, uh, open market. Right, right. And in order to do that, he brought someone. His name is Abdullah Dardari, and you can check him. Abdallah Dardari is groomed in the international finance systems, like in the World Bank, IMF, and he currently is. He led ESCWA, the UN agency in Lebanon, and I think now he is leading the UN agency in Afghanistan. So he's leading one of the UN financial economic programs in Afghanistan, and he believes in economic liberalization, and this has started in 2005 basically. And this era witnessed lots of struggles for the middle class, because once you start changing the nature of the economy, many people who used to rely on the public sector to work and gain money and survive, basically, they started finding themselves increasingly in a society which is privatizing the economy and creating job opportunities for people who are more, let's say, educated in universities, whereas they have, let's say, secondary school certificate or working in a public sector for a salary like 30,000 Syrian lira back then used to be, or 20,000, 20,000, 25,000. It's like $500, $600 maximum. And then you have someone with an university degree. He has a job in a pharmaceutical industry or in a bank for $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, right? So this has created this disparity in the society, and education has become more elitist, because now most of the private sectors started hiring people graduating from private universities and not from public universities, because they say in the private universities they speak better English and they receive better education. So banks and private sectors and investors, etc., started hiring people from the private sector, from the private universities. I myself studied in a private university, and I think the vast majority of the Syrians couldn't back then afford to go to private university. Uh, my tuition fee per semester was 160,000 Syrian lira, which was like $3,000. So per year was $6,000 tuition fee, plus you're eating, and you need to rent a place. So I don't know, it was around $10,000 per year or so. That was a lot of money for Syria back then. Although my father was from the below middle class, but they have sacrificed a lot from their uh, let's say welfare. Like they started, we used to go per year to pay, like go on tourism, etc. We cut everything for the sake of education back then. um, so in this case, there was this public discomfort by the majority of the people who were used to work for the public sector, right? Under his father, the public sector was the backbone of the economy, and now under Bashar, it's becoming more privatized. And during the privatization of the Syrian economy, he opened the borders and removed the tariffs with Turkey. So now Turkey can send its products to Syria with zero tariffs. And in this case, the Syrian economy was still new. It's fresh. It's still formulating itself. So when you open borders with a country which has a bigger economy and already established industrial sector and production, they will eat you, right? And they will be able to overwhelm your markets with cheaper products. But Syria managed still, despite that, to build industrial zones and still build a certain level of good production in Syria, including clothing, shoes, assembling cars, and cotton, wheat, for example. And so many things used to be exported outside, not only for local markets. And Syria presented a model, relatively good model. But the one time I met the Abdallah Dardari in Beirut, and we were speaking about this case, and he told me that the model that he believed in economic theory, that the old economic system has to be completely crushed and a new one has to be born. And in between 2005 and 2010, when he was leading this economic transition in Syria, he believed that Syria was still in the process of destroying the previous system, economic system, for the sake of the new one. But in 2010, 2011, the Arab Spring started, and there was here enough fertile ground for dissatisfaction, economic dissatisfaction in the Syrian society by the people who were mostly living in the rural areas. So, as you remember at the beginning, I said his father was more of a socialist and more the son of the middle class, supporting them, enabling them, giving them healthcare, education, building them roads, extending electricity to the rural areas, which were completely dead, as I mentioned before that. Now, the rural areas were more neglected. The agricultural sector was more neglected under Bashar, unlike his father's era. So now that the Arab Spring started, the majority of the people who protested against him or had carried arms against him, they were from the rural areas. And ironic enough, the first protests started in Daraa, in the southern governorates of Daraa, and the southern governments of Daraa included you have the Baas party. Most members of the Baas party used to be from Horan in Daraa. So imagine that the Baas party, which is the leading and the ruling party of Syria, has most of its members and are from Daraa, and this is where the protests started against the regime. And I would like to mention to you, if you remember, the former vice foreign minister and then foreign minister of Syria, Faisal Maqdad, was from Daraa. Farouk al-Shara, which I mentioned that he would have made a good candidate for president after Hafez al-Assad, was from Daraa. Many officials in Syria came from Daraa. And this is where the protests started. So I think in this case, it's very important for the people to know this historical background and why, yes, there is outside interference. It's undeniable, but Syria kept its windows open to allow these powers to jump in the house. And when we saw that things are not going well, we didn't try to fix the mistakes, right? And this has accelerated after 2011 when the war started in Syria. And most of the country went outside the control of the government. Then, due and thanks to the support of the allies, Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia, they managed to capture most of the Syrian territory. But this was between 2011 and 2018. In 2018 till 2020, this was the era of the military operations. Then the confrontations cooled down, and here it was expected from Bashar to make a compromise with the opposition, to include them in the government, to reconcile with the Kurds, and this was also expected from Iran and Russia. So Iran and Russia were allies with Assad, but at the same time they expected him to do some reforms and include the opposition into the power. Not all of them. You don't have to include Jolani, but there are many political opposition that you could include in the system, which he rejected over and over again, including reconciliation with the Kurds. And I know that the Kurdish militias wanted their autonomy and federalism, etc., etc. But what I'm trying to say here, Assad was not flexible enough. They could have found a middle ground, like as the representative of SDF, Mazloum Abdi, like he could have invited him to Damascus and negotiated, but he wanted to keep everything for him. He wanted to restore the eastern shore of the Euphrates. He wanted to restore Idlib and entire northern parts of Syria by military force, or waiting for the political circumstances to change to take an opportunity and restore these areas. But this has proven to be wrong, because there were new realities on the ground. You have SDF around 60,000 fighters. You have HTS around 40,000 fighters. So you either need your allies, in this case, to wage a brutal military campaign against them, and they're telling you no, they're not going to back that military effort. So what would you do about that? If you can't restore these areas by military force, then at least you have to negotiate, right? And politics is the art of the possible. And he wanted the art of the impossible, like completely restore, and I believed in the restoration of every inch of Syria to the government control. But this could have been done through negotiations, diplomacy, and compromise from both sides, from all sides, something that he rejected to do. And in this case, I think he believed firmly that he won this war through military means. So if he won the war through military means, why would he compromise? But this was a false interpretation of the situation in Syria. And this was something that the people who surrounded him, they have completely detached him from the reality. The people who were giving him advices were not the smartest people, by the way. And I know many of them by names, and they were very adamant, stubborn, and they were like telling him, Sir, you are the best, and you won this war through military means. Why would you compromise? Why would we implement the UN Security Council resolution? Why would we implement the Astana agreements? No, we won. We don't have to do that, right? This is what they were telling him. And he completely believed that there is no longer danger against his system any longer. And this was the shock factor later in 2024 when the attack happened. They were shocked that it happened because they miscalculated. And in this case, I want to mention something also important, because this compromise should have been done not only with the opposition, the people, Syrians basically, but also with Turkey. And Turkey is a very important player in the region. I think if I want to put a list of countries which damaged Syria the most in the past 14 years, I would say Turkey comes to first place. And Turkey is directly responsible under Erdogan for funneling and sending tens of thousands of jihadists, takfiris to Syria, arming and supporting and sending the weapons through the borders, and basically helping the establishment of Al-Nusra Front, then HDS, and also ISIS. So in this case, once the Russians agreed with the Turks that they could solve this, after liberating Aleppo, the Russians forced Turkey to withdraw from Aleppo, right? Because those were their proxies in Aleppo in 2016. And they have agreed on a formula under the Astana talks that they would discuss the destiny and the future of Syria via diplomacy. And Assad signed and agreed on this, right? So he started opening up to the Arabic countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but the communication with Turkey was only on the security level. So they used to meet regularly in Kasab, security officers, and discuss, but they didn't take one step further and strike a deal with Turkey. And Turkey was very, it has an emergency or urgent situation in its own country that, look, I'm having 3.5 million Syrians and I want to send them back. My economy is also, there is a big burden on me. And I want to solve this situation in Syria. I'm going to become an energy hub for Europe. I want to stabilize the region. The interests were different. 10 years ago, they supported these terrorist groups, and now they wanted to end the situation in Syria for their own sake and interests, right? So this was a window of opportunity for him to meet with Erdogan, and the allies of Assad, Russia and Iran, were pressing him to meet with Erdogan. And I mentioned this information the other day, and I said, Iran cut the oil for Assad for 3 months before, during the elections in Turkey, the past presidential elections or the parliamentary elections in Turkey, because Assad rejected to meet with Erdogan, and they wanted him to go and meet with Erdogan. And he said no. So if your allies who basically came for your help and supported you and restored your rule over the majority of Syria, and if they are telling you to meet if you're relying on them, then you're depending on them. So you're not independent completely, but you're depending on them for oil, fuel, energy, also money, military support, ammunition, etc. So they told you to go and you rejected. So the result was that they were very upset with him in Moscow and in Tehran. And at the same time, and during this time, he was opening to the Arabic countries and taking steps away from the axis of resistance, let's say, in order to rebalance his relationship between the Arabic countries and Iran. And Iran was very upset again. So all this, it's accumulated miscalculations led that in Russia and in Tehran, they have came to the conclusion that why are we going to save him this time? He has become a burden. He is not striking a compromise with the opposition. He's not meeting with Erdogan, and he's taking steps away from the axis of resistance. Not much, but still. He's not being flexible on this. And Erdogan probably told them that he could secure their interests in Syria in an indirect way. So in politics, there is no permanent friendship and permanent animosity. So I think they came to the conclusion that this was the end for him in Syria. But I would like to reiterate on this point that the Syrian military, like it was, logically it was impossible for the regime to collapse, right? 14 days, 20 days? Who in his sane mind thinks that a regime that has 300,000 soldiers, where did they go? What happened to the military? How did they withdraw after withdrawal after withdrawal, right? I'm sure there are multiple things here. And I would like to mention the first thing, and that is the soldiers themselves. They were demoralized. And this is very important. Like, you, as Assad, you won this war thanks to the military, regardless of the allies. Were it not for the military, you cannot win. And if you didn't have soldiers ready to die and sacrifice for you and for the country, you couldn't have won this war in the first stage of this war, right? The allies' support is complementary. It's not essential, because if you don't have an army to fight, as much as support you give, you can't win the war. So you had soldiers ready to fight and die. 150,000 soldiers minimum perished in this conflict for you and for the country. And what did you do for them after the hot war was over in 2018? The situation in the military was miserable. The soldiers were hungry. You were feeding them bread and potatoes, and their salaries is $30 or $50 maximum. How could they survive under such circumstances? If I'm a man and I have a family, a mother, a father, or a son, or whatever, how can I survive with that little money? You cannot. And at the same time, the people see that those who fought 7 years, 8 years, 10 years, that we did all these sacrifices for what, basically? For me to be poor? For me to be forever disabled? For me to be neglected? Whereas you go to Damascus and you see all these fancy cars, and the rich people can just escape military service, and then the poor people go serve the military. For what? For what they should fight for you again? Why they should fight for you again? Why? There is no reason for them to fight again. Like, if you have to keep the military fed enough, financially and food-wise. Otherwise, why would a hungry person fight for you? And this has opened a big also corruption in the country, that the military doesn't get any money, basically, is hungry. This opens the door for corruption. Like you see in everywhere in Syria under Assad, there were military checkpoints, and you have to give them cigarettes, a package of cigarettes, or 2,000 lira, 4,000 lira, 5,000 lira every time you pass through a military checkpoint. So the people were upset for paying every time on a checkpoint, And then the military was forced to get bribes, basically, to survive. So you have created these conditions for bribery and corruption. And then if a junior military officer, he's he's he, he's getting 5,000 Syrian lira to let a civilian like myself pass by, he could allow for a $500, let's say, for an entire let's say black market to thrive. He would send anything, allow anything to pass through the checkpoint if you pay him enough. And believe me, there are people over the people who used to sit on these checkpoints, right? It's absurd that you create such a situation in the country that the military has to feed itself by bribery. And if you allow them to do that, then bigger power will come and they will pay him even more to sell the country, basically. Like, I'm highly confident that during this last offensive by HTS against Aleppo, Hama, Homs, Damascus, I'm highly confident that there were senior officers in the military who sold, and they gave orders to the military to lay down their arms and not to fight. First, they didn't want to fight for Bashar. Secondly, if they were bribed by Qatar or Turkey or the US, it was meaningful. There was no meaning for them. It was meaningless to fight anyways, so he could make some more money. So this could explain why in many of the places the military laid down its arms as well and didn't fight for him. And the last thing is the way he escaped the country. Now, this is also important, like what lessons we have to learn from this, that he himself, I think he can take lots of lessons from this video, from the mistakes, but most importantly for us as Syrians, there shouldn't be any political figure that people should glorify like it's a saint or a god, This has to be a lesson for everyone. Like I stood by the Syrian government against the foreign insurgency. I was not a loyalist. I wasn't someone who is like, whatever the government does or Assad does, I'm going to support him. No. But we had no choice but to stand by the Syrian army against these HTS, Nusra, ISIS terrorists. And everything I told you in the past 8 years, that if Assad is gone, this is going to happen, everything is happening now, from sectarian violence, from balkanization efforts of Syria. So the lesson here should be that in the future, after HTS, after the failure of this experience, there has to be people, military and political minds, to build a political system in a way that it's not based on one person. Like that Assad is gone, then the country crumbles. This is not a political system that can sustain. There has to be a deep state. Like there is a deep state in Egypt. It's the military, right? And they have their grip over the economy. There is a deep state here in Germany. There is a deep state in the United States. Regardless of these political elections, what the people think, there are certain headlines that the politicians are ready to do something that goes against the will of the people, because there is a deep state. There are things that they have to pass. There are things that they have to do for the sake of the deep state. And when the politicians go, the deep state stays. These bureaucrats stay in the US, in Europe, etc. And this keeps the country more functional, regardless of who is in power and who is not in power. Egypt is one example. Like they have a strong military, which have a strong grip over the economy, and if Sisi is gone tomorrow, the country will not collapse. But this was not the case in Syria. When Assad was gone, the country has and indeed collapsed. I think in the future, what is going to happen in Syria is these HTS people, of course, they are the intelligence construct of Turkey and of Qatar. The Saudis will try to compete with this influence in Syria. So in the beginning of this video, I told you about Mustafa Atlas, who was the friend of Hafez al-Assad, who was part of the coup in 1970, and he was the defense minister of Syria for a long, long time. Then his son, Manaf Tlas, he was also in the military, he was a colonel, and he was close friends with Bashar, but then he deserted in 2012, and the Saudi intelligence and the French intelligence evacuated him from Syria out, and then they took him to Saudi Arabia, where he is possibly groomed now, and they were waiting for the moment now to lead Syria. Is he going to lead Syria or not? That's a different question, but I think the Saudis will try to bring him back to Syria now, and they're going to present him as a military leader in the country, which knows the former regime and knows how to manage the affairs of the country. They're going to present him as the, you remember under Nasser, it was called the Free Officers Revolution. And I think they're going to try to do something similar. They're going to compete with the Turkish intelligence and with the Qatari intelligence via him, Manaf Atlas, and they're going to try to establish a state which is based on few figures, basically, one of which probably is going to be there are different personalities. For example, Jamal Suleiman. Jamal Suleiman is a Syrian actor, but he was an oppositionist after the insurgency against Assad. They are going to offer Jamal Suleiman a presidency and Manaf Atlas, probably, I'm just saying, defense ministry. But they're going to try to establish a Sisi type, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi type rule in Syria. Someone who is has close ties and loyal to Saudi Arabia and has enough military experience to lead a country. But is it going to work or not? I don't know. I'm very pessimistic. I suspect that there is a way for HTS to succeed or to build any civil state. All the indications show that the country is headed to balkanization, and unfortunately speaking, due to the sectarian violence against the minorities in Homs, Hama and Latakia, many of these communities are thinking narrow, and the Druze have isolated themselves from the rest, the Alawites are isolating themselves from the rest, the Christians are the same, the Kurds are the same. Nobody has a trust in HDS. Even the secular and moderate Sunnis have no trust in HDS, but they cannot speak if you're living under HDS rule. But the Druze, for example, they have weapons in their regions, like in As-Suwaida and in the suburbs of Damascus. Christians in Homs and Hama, they don't have any weapons, and they're being really persecuted, and the Alawites are being killed. So everybody is now thinking narrow because of this sectarian violence, and I don't blame them, but this will only lead into creating cantons, and each canton basically is one colored, and Turkey will present itself as a protector of the Alawites in the coast. This was something also confirmed by the manager or the director of the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, Rami Abdul Rahman, who is an anti-Assad figure and anti-Assad outlet, that Turkey is trying to occupy the coast of Syria. For multiple reasons. They will say we're going to protect the Alawites, but the main reason is the gas in the Mediterranean. They want to extract the gas, they want to keep it for themselves. Qatar is going to do the same thing. So the country is headed, unfortunately, to very dark times. And I'm just saying, maybe, just maybe, people have to leave. This is a very unfortunate thing to say, but maybe they have to pass through this. I always thought that we in Syria have hit rock bottom, but it seems there is still more to dig in. And it's going to be dark, it's going to be humiliating, it's going to be suffering for the Syrian people. I'm just hoping that at the end of the tunnel there would be some light, that we could re-establish a nation state. Am I hopeful? No. I'm just hoping, but I'm not sure this is going to happen. What happened in Syria is going to change the history of Syria and its civilization. This is a moment where from the 60s till today, because there was this pan-Arabist movements in the region to establish nation states and then create unity between the Arabic countries, economic integration and geographical unity. This is going to be the end for this type of political project. And the alternative is Turkey. Turkey is a new Ottoman power. They're going to present themselves as the power that can fill the vacuum. And they will, this was something mentioned for a long time by Erdogan, by his former foreign minister, Ahmed Davutoglu, that they want to revive this new Ottomanism in the region. And they have seen now a perfect opportunity in Syria. And they have enough resources and military and supporters as well among HTS people to manage the affairs of Syria the way they like. I think that Syria is now under the grip of Turkey and Qatar and the US and Israel. Saudi Arabia and the UAE will try to compete this influence. So during the issues that I'm telling you, none of these powers are independent. There is no grassroots Syrian movement to build a state in Syria. Every political power or military unit is supported and dependent on other powers. So there is no Syrian political process. It is going to be outside forces imposing solutions on Syria. And this is going to be the case with the economy as well. Syria will no longer have a national industry and the public sector. Everything will be privatized and Syrians will become nothing but consumers. If you're not a producer, you're a consumer, and the Syrian economy will be based on foreign investments. There will be companies, factories, even energy companies. Everyone will come and invest, and everyone will make money. Some Syrians, of course, they will fill their pockets enough to buy a car and go to restaurants, this and that. But at the end of the day, you are going to be a consumer in Syria. You're not going to be a producer. And this is something that I am very, I like to focus on, because in the context of World Economic Forum and Davos, you will own nothing and you will be happy. This is a similar globalist agenda also in Syria, to take away the resources of the people, to basically make them reliant and dependent on the investors and the multinational corporations. It's not allowed in this globalist world for countries to have a sovereignty, to have a national industry and public sector. These things are gone for them, and they will enforce it via military force, they will enforce it via AI, they will enforce it through different means on the people. They will do everything in their capacity to tell you, you will own nothing and you will be happy, and this is going to be the case in Syria as well. People will drive cars, they will probably go on a vacation 2 weeks per year, they will think they're happy, but they will not own their country, they will not own their civilization, they will not produce anything to the outside world, anything meaningful, and they will not be remembered. And Syrians used to be remembered that they're exporters of cotton and wheat. Nobody will remember them now. Everything will be in the name of the multinational corporations. So I spoke almost 58 minutes sitting here in a park. It become a little bit freezing cold. I have to run now to home and post this for you. I really appreciate you tuning into today's stream. It's not a live stream. I recorded this and during the noon time. If you like this content, I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and if you want to do more and participate in supporting this channel financially, you can become a patron. You can become a premium member of YouTube. You can support this channel via Buy Me a Coffee. There are different means in the description below, and all the links are there. You can find it. But if you can't do that, I would really appreciate it only if you can hit the like button and subscribe to this YouTube channel. And I will come back to you again on Thursday, right? Today is Wednesday. On Thursday, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.